Gulliver opened his eyes to find he had a group of small people standing on his chest. His hands and feet were tied with ropes, and he could not move. He roared and struggled to get up. The stakes around him rose up instantly. The dwarfs, who did not have time to escape, swung in the air. Gulliver thought it was a dream. He hoped he could wake up quickly. At that moment, the general came galloping on his horse. He threw the spear in his hand at Gulliver's feet. Before he could react, his pants were hooked by the dwarfs behind him. After a few tugs and pulls, they dragged Gulliver to the ground. When he woke up, he was tied to a car. The general takes him through the streets. The crowd was very curious to discuss the big monster in front of them. Gulliver was presented to the king as a gift by the general. Soldiers activated the mechanism to erect him. Looking at the Gulliver, which was taller than the palace, everyone was excited and scared. Gulliver was locked up in an abandoned cave by the sea. He met Jack, who was also imprisoned here because he looked at Princess Mary in the crowd, so he was locked up as an admirer. They shared the same interests. They soon became close friends. The next day, Gulliver was taken to the farm. He plows the field with his car. Suddenly, an alarm sounded in the city. It turned out that the enemy had been trying to attack Lilliput. They had asked their soldiers to infiltrate the palace as spies. When the general heard the siren, he turned around. He asked Gulliver to take him to save the passersby. Gulliver rushed to the palace with him. He did not forget to spit out a word. "Why is Mary standing outside the city gates waiting to be kidnapped?" Hearing his, the general was very upset. He ordered Gulliver to get down. Then he landed in a handsome pose. He rushed to the city with his sword raised. Jack was very worried about Mary's safety. He untied Gulliver from his bonds. He unteased Gulliver and asked him to help him rescue Mary. Gulliver arrives just in time. He picked up the villain with his fingers. After turning around, he threw them into the water. Soon, he rescued Mary from the water. By the time the general arrived, Mary was gone. Gulliver put Mary on the ground. That's when the news came that the king was trapped in the fire. By the time everyone arrived, the king had already started to give his last words. Jack shouted, asking Gulliver to do something. Just as he finished his words, Gulliver pulled down his pants in front of everyone. He pissed on the blazing fire inside the building. It was a bit crude, but his method worked. The general looked at the scene before him. He didn't know what to say. He stepped forward to stop it. Gulliver heard his voice and turned around. The soldiers are drenched. Although the king was in a terrible state, but he still saw Gulliver as a lifesaver. That night, a feast was held in his honor. At the banquet, Gulliver picked up a fruit plate and threw it into his mouth. As he ate, he told them about his heroic deeds. He received admiring looks from everyone, but what he said was a fabrication. Where he lives, Gulliver is an otaku man who doesn't like change. He worked in the mailroom for 5 years without getting a promotion. A trainee on his first day of work, the next day he became Gulliver's boss. Lily, who had a crush on him for 5 years, was standing next to him. He couldn't say a word. He wanted to go on an adventure. Instead, he was blown to Little Man Island by an unknown hurricane. By coincidence, Gulliver became the patron saint of Little Man Island. The king had someone help him build a luxury villa. Even his cup of coffee was taken care of. The king also built a private theater for him. He treated Gulliver as a VIP. When the general saw this, he was jealous. He started to attack Gulliver. Hundreds of shells were fired at him. The next second, he had holes all over his stomach, but he didn't seem to feel any pain. He bounced all the shells back with his best effort. The enemy was trying to avoid the shells. They all jumped into the sea. At this moment, Gulliver was also shocked. He didn't know he was so powerful. He fished into the water. All the ships could only follow him. The enemy's ace fleet was being played with by Gulliver at will. Everyone was cheering for Gulliver, who had won the battle. Only the general beside him looked very bad because he was the one who made the enemy's attack happen. He wanted to punish Gulliver, so he shut down all the defense systems. He gave the enemy the opportunity to attack. And all at once, thousands of shells came at the island of the little people. But his plan failed. This battle made Gulliver a hero admired by all. Posters of him began to hang in the streets. Short sleeves with his head on them were sold out of stock. He even had his hair cut. All of this made Gulliver proud. His best friend Jack was worried. He thought Gulliver should think more about the security of the country. Gulliver didn't care what he said. He continues to have fun. Jack is right to be concerned. At this point, the general is upset that Gulliver has taken his credit. He defected to the enemy monarch. He offers up a robot manual. While Gulliver was still enjoying himself, the city suddenly sounded an alarm that had never been heard before. Everyone panicked and hid behind Gulliver. The general arrived in front of him in a steel bomb. Gulliver spat at him with contempt. The angry general ordered. The steel armor began to transform. He was half a head taller than Gulliver. He pushed the steel armor with all his strength, but he soon realized it was no use. He had to say that he had just been working out by himself. Then he turned around and ran. The general wouldn't let him go. He was picked up by his pants. At this point, he didn't want to struggle either. He kept begging for mercy. The people were very disappointed with his behavior of conceding defeat without fighting. At this point, Gulliver had to confess to everyone everything about his heroic deeds was a fabrication. He was just a mediocre mailroom employee. Gulliver was then tied to a plank by the general and floated away on the waves. Gulliver wakes up and is struck by how beautiful he looks in the mirror in his dress. He did not have time to admire. The room began to shake. He looked. A giant girl appeared in front of him. Only then did Gulliver realize he had drifted all the way from the island of the little people to the land of the giants. He was treated like a toy by the girl. Unable to accept this, Gulliver started to scream, but the girl roughly gagged him with a milk bottle. He was thrown on a bed and played with as he pleased. She thoughtfully put on his diaper. Unable to resist, he had to accept it first. Gulliver was able to accept the girl's manipulations with equanimity, because if he didn't want to cooperate, he would end up like the little bunny doll across the room. After a long day of abuse, Gulliver was lying in bed, exhausted, when he thought he was going to spend the rest of his life here. Jack appeared. It turns out that a few days ago, another giant came to Little Man Island. He was Gulliver's crush, Lily. Gulliver was anxious when he heard the news. He took Jack and left the Valley of the Giants with his parachute. He floated with the wind back to the island of the little people. Gulliver finally saw Lily, whom he had missed. With the help of everyone, Lily finally realized the man in front of her had been secretly in love with her for 5 years. But he never said it. Gulliver thought he'd be disliked. Lily actually likes him, too. But he refused Lily's offer to steal the boat and leave, because in just a few days together, Gulliver saw the people of this country as family. He wanted to fight the general again. He wanted to help the king regain his throne, this time with Lily by his side to cheer him on. He gave Gulliver a lot of confidence. He launched at the gauntlet, but was pushed away again. When he attacked again, he was grabbed by the hands again. The general upgraded his equipment. Gulliver was electrocuted to the point of immobilization. Jack could not bear to watch Gulliver being beaten. He took the opportunity to enter the inner structure of the steel armor and disable the electrical device. Gulliver grabbed the hammer and pounced on the steel armor's body, hitting it hard and fast. Finally, he ends the battle with a backbreaker. The end of the story. Jack's bravery was recognized by the king. He betrothed Mary to him after completing the mission. Gulliver and Lily left the kingdom of the little people together by boat. Back to normal life. Gulliver is no longer cowardly and inferior. He became the editor-in-chief of the magazine while gaining sweet love. He wrote an article about this amazing experience and published it in the magazine.